Thanks for the tip on this. Very helpful. I have a question. When do you emphasize a person in a sentence? Okay. So in Spanish, whenever you have a sentence, there's almost always a verb. And a verb is just a word that describes an action. So to do something, basically, to eat, to run, to drink, whatever. And so there's almost always persons or people, or pronouns is what they're called in like linguistics. And so in Spanish, usually, if you say, for example, hablo español, that means I speak Spanish. The pronoun for that is I, meaning I speak Spanish, from hablo. But you don't actually add the pronoun that is. Usually you just say hablo español, right? But in schools, you'll see a lot of people teach like this idea where you have to add this before it. And that's because you have to do that in English, right? You can't just say you can't just say speak Spanish. You have to show who is doing the verb. And so what's different in Spanish is that in Spanish, when you already conjugate the verb, it already reflects the pronoun, basically the person doing the verb. And so in Spanish, you don't actually have to say, for example, hablo español. Yo hablo español. Hablo español. And so what this person is asking about is, when do you emphasize a person in a sentence? Normally, you just use the verb to do this, but I also read that you have to use the pronoun sometimes. I don't know when to use the pronoun to emphasize. Oh, and that's just referring to that whenever you add the pronoun, it usually gives a feeling of emphasis, and so you use that whenever you want to emphasize something. And so an example of that is if someone accused you of something and said like, "Oh, did you do this?" Do you see how that you pronoun is being emphasized? And so you might respond by saying, "No, I didn't do this. He did it." And in that case, you would always add, or, usually if you want to emphasize the he, like we did in English, you would add for example, él, right? Él lo hizo, for example. Or you could say, lo hizo él. You could put the pronoun that does the verb after as well. And so that's how you emphasize things in Spanish for who did it. Like in English, you would just put actual strain on the pronoun, but in Spanish, you would just directly add it. And sometimes it's necessary for context. For example, if you said habla, that could mean he speaks, or it could mean she speaks, or it could mean it speaks, or it could mean you speak. And it could also mean that it could mean she is speaking, he is speaking, you formally are speaking, or it is speaking, if you can make that make sense. And so sometimes you just need it just to clarify like the person. And so that's when you use that.